We have a great panel today. This group, we did a prep call, and Sean pointed out that the prep call took about 20 minutes longer than we actually have on stage. So we're going to try to squeeze a lot in there. We have Dimitri Beredzin from 1KX. Dimitri is a pretty good author on this topic and expert on the topic and has some interesting ideas. Dylan Hunzecker, Intrinsic Capital. She's kind of one of my go-to people when I have questions about DAOs and NFTs and everything else. Shiv Malik, Pool Data is a data union infrastructure operator. They also build infrastructure for DAOs. And Sean Smith, Pechakucha, wanted to be clear that they are a Web 2.6 company. They're not a Web 2.5, they're not a Web 3.0. So I look forward to this.
Great. Oh, I think we can sit in the middle. No, wait, I'll sit this way. Oh, wait, okay.
This is fun.
I'll sit over. Okay, great.
Change again.
Okay.
Okay, this is a really fun group. We do have 20 minutes. The dedication for these guys, they all flew in from out of town, including this man who was on vacation in Italy and is going back to London like tomorrow or something crazy. So, I mean, there's real dedication and love here for DAOs. So, two quick questions. How many people are a member of a DAO? Raise your hands. I don't know, it's kind of interesting.
Oh.
And then of the people that are members, how many have actually participated, actually voted in the DAO? Okay, this is a great data point. So we have 20 minutes. Let's just kind of hop into it. Dimitri, what is a DAO?
Yeah, a lot of different definitions. I'll give a few flavors. It's a group of people with a shared mission and a shared bank account. Another way to frame it is digital cooperatives. If you look at the definition of a cooperative, it's a member-owned, member-governed group that operates for the benefit of its members. This is basically an on-chain version of that. A more nuanced description is it's a group of people who are loosely organizationally aligned and strongly economically aligned towards a common goal. I think the general theme here is fluidity of membership and ownership of those members. Different flavors, you have protocol DAOs. This is like your on-chain analogy of like a company. I don't want to say shareholder, but they aim to increase the value of the tokens that they receive as ownership. Another flavor is collector DAOs or investment DAOs. These are individuals who pool money together to make purchases. Some of them buy NFTs, some of them invest in companies, even like traditional like equity structures. And the third flavor are service DAOs, which are effectively like consulting companies where every person in that group is already like a partner and they all get revenue share. This could be like a design firm where everyone in that gets like a portion of the revenue that comes in.
Right, so a ton of flavors, a lot of different applications of it. Dylan,
Yep.
you kind of mentioned like very quickly the different use cases, Dimitri, but like
Right,
what kind of use cases come to your mind?
Right, so I think to me, Dimitri mentioned investment DAOs, and I think a huge use case for DAOs that people have overlooked, but as a VC I've actually seen be revolutionary, would be multi-party digital asset management, right? So basically there's several flavors of this. So for example, because the structure itself is more decentralized than a traditional firm that would have analysts, associates, principals, general partner, and a managing partner, you're able to aggregate different sources of deal flow. So the best firms on earth have actually been doing this. The best venture capital firms and investment firms have been doing this for many years. Sequoia has a Scouts program, for example, and now they have tons of employees. But DAOs actually do this naturally, and they do this from the ground up, and they're able to actually build from bottom to top, right? Instead of just having this one amazing, or these three partners that come together, right? So I think one of the other amazing things about having network effects, being involved in an investment DAO, is that you can suddenly have investment DAOs that wouldn't have existed thematically, because the people that own a lot of the people with deeper pockets wouldn't necessarily be interested in the theme. So there's so many examples. For example, Komorebi Collective was the first ever investment DAO that focused on female and non-binary participants that wanted to be founders in crypto. They actually started as a DAO partially because there was so much grassroots interest. And so many people wanted to participate, but they would never have been able to make the minimum commitment into a fund, right? So then they actually were so successful as a DAO and in building a community and a brand as a community that now they actually will have their own fund, right? So it's almost like you see a reverse engineering of what has traditionally happened in VC. And again, so second, you can also aggregate incentives or even automate them, which is super fascinating. And that kind of is part and parcel to the different themes. Like, one of the best use cases for a DAO, I think, would be a scouting program or some sort of situation where you have to pay people piecemeal, and you want to actually make sure as the participant that you're going to get paid, right? So a lot of elite scout programs per se, that's written into a contract, but if you could actually write that into code, and a lot of VC actually in crypto is done using USDC, a stable coin, so it's literally done in crypto, and so you could automate the actual payouts. And so there's one of my favorite investment DAOs is called Global Coin Research. Joyce Yang founded it, but they are now basically automating payouts from the participants who actually scout, and they've been ridiculously successful. Their returns were basically top tier if they had been a fund. I know 1KX has some of the best returns, and last year actually had the best, but they were very, very good, almost competitive to you. And so, and they actually started doing research and aggregating research from the different members, and then they built a brand doing that and started doing investments. So to me, that's like such an interesting use case, because outside of universities and very monolithic, very large research firms that are very staid and old and maybe not focused on crypto, you can actually do all this primary research that's needed because of things that happen on chain and too quickly, et cetera. And then you can actually also just use infrastructure that's being created to stand up a fund, but it would technically be a DAO. And to me, that's fascinating because I see so many people that are standing up a fund, but they're using AngelList's rolling fund structure, or they're using DAO infrastructure. And so Origami, which was incubated by Orange DAO, which was founded by a lot of people who were in Y Combinator, is a great example of this. And there's tons of other tools, and you could argue that that's regulatory arbitrage, and that might not happen forever, but that's great. And then you can also buy assets that you would never be able to buy because you can pool them very efficiently. So like Constitution DAO did this or tried, and then Lynx DAO actually bought a golf course.
So the use cases just kind of go on.
Yeah,
and on
they're
and
just
on and on.
infinite. I mean, novel protocol governance. You mentioned this.
Seriously, we had a call to do like the pre, and I mean these guys just wanted to go and riff. There's so much here.
Well, we also spoke last night, and we said every organization that's shadowy and that people don't like and that make decisions without that affect all of the counterparties, but without actually asking the counterparties, like an HOA, would be best as a DAO.
Sure.
Because people would have a vested interest, but they just don't get the chance. Right.
So totally. Yeah. So these people love DAOs. We're only here for like another 13 minutes, and this guy hasn't even talked yet. He flew in from London to be
I
here.
talked too much.
Well, I was going to say, you keep saying that I like that. I'm supposed to be the skeptic on the panel.
Right,
and I guess I kind of am. So I floated in here, I guess, to share my skepticism about DAOs with you.
Well, why are you a skeptic? So there's a lot of use cases. But credit unions, right? Weren't there other variants or things before DAOs?
So I guess a couple of sort of intellectual themes as to why DAOs should work. So you've got the kind of the wisdom of crowds, which, it dates back to 1907. I think Sir Francis Galton was trying to get 700 people to guess the weight of a cow. And they all individually got it wrong, but it turns out if you average them, they got it spot on. It was 1 1,200 pounds or whatever, right? So brilliant. So it turns out, the wisdom of crowds really works. If only you could harness this in a DAO, right? That would be brilliant. And that, I think, was one of the big intellectual themes of the DAO, which started in 2016. It was like the first DAO, really. But spectacularly kind of failed because they got the tech wrong, and it got leached, and then Ethereum had to fork. It was awful. Still trauma from that event. Then you have another intellectual trend, which I guess is and you were saying your wife, I don't know if you want me to share this.
That's great, love it.
It was an anarchist. And so there's an anarchistic theme, and I guess, that feeds into DAOs, right? Which is, look, can we work, and if you really know what anarchism is, then you'll know it's like, look, can individuals, it's got a big streak of libertarianism there, can individuals work individually in a collective without structure? Right? Structure is bad, it's tyrannical. Of course, the antithesis to this is a great essay by a woman called Jo Freeman, who wrote in the 1970s this essay called The Tyranny of Structurelessness. And in some senses, DAOs have fallen foul of this. It's like, if it turns out if you have no leaders and no rules, then actually what you end up with is a bunch of informal kind of ongoings, and people will make rules and take leadership roles anyway. Do DAOs really kind of mitigate against this? So those are the two intellectual trends which feed into suggesting that DAO should really work. DAO should be great. DAO should be brilliant. Then you look at what they've actually done, and it turns out that they're not very good. Can they get beyond like the hedge fund, right?
Yeah, well, so a lot of, by the way, my wife isn't the anarchist, it was Brian's. So
Oh,
my wife who's over here, she's
sorry,
like, what,
I
I'm an
got that.
anarchist?
Brian,
Anyway,
Brian's
there's a good
wife,
conversation
yeah,
with Brian
okay.
and that. So what they could be, right? So let's bridge that gap. Like, what could they be if we actually, if they were able to, achieve what we think they could achieve?
Yeah, I think I would frame, and like all those, there's a lot of issues and most are broken for sure. And also, it's not a product, right? Like, it's an organizational model around a product that you're building. So you need to actually like build something or do something that people want as like a step one. But I frame it more so in the context of like multiplayer X, like whatever X is, the difference is you're doing it collaboratively. And I think it has analogies to future of work and the idea of like gig workers, but it bakes in more ownership into those workers. But also when you think about like multiplayer, there's been culturally, there's this idea of like individuality and creating something with just like one person. And I think there's been more of like a cultural shift to collaborating with creating things. And we're seeing some examples of that today across music and arts. You have one DAO that's called Headless Chaos. It's a group of 77 musicians that came together and worked on an album. And they released that album as NFTs. And you buy the NFTs, and that group collectively has ownership of the music that they produced. Another example is what you could do if you have like journalist collectives. You no longer need a distributor. You have sustainable funding models. You collectively come together. Maybe you align on some content that you want to produce or some viewpoint that you want to give. There's a project called Meta Label that was founded by the former founder of Kickstarter and Etsy that abstract this even more. Like, you could create like physical things. You could create your own like music labels, bottom-up labels. So I think there's a lot of these ideas around doing something collaboratively and sharing that value with all the people that you're doing this with. And I think that actually applies pretty broadly.
Dylan, are there DAOs in particular like that you're seeing that you're paying attention to?
I mean, I think I'm more interested in starting certain types of DAOs, like a Scout DAO. And I'm looking at different models, right? Because there are certain, like I mentioned, GCR, I mentioned Komorebi Collective. I think also I'm interested in the companies. There's a lot of companies that have announced that they're actually considering becoming a DAO. Or they're
like big companies, like established companies?
No, there were a few. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but yeah, I think I think I'm kind of following Orange DAO. I'm following a lot of like investment DAOs mostly.
What do you got?
I was going to say, one thing we missed off is obviously the technical innovation that allows DAOs really to prosper in a sense, which is the multi-signature contract, the multi-sig contract, right? So it basically says, look, you need more than one person to sign off on moving money. And you could have 1,000 people sign off, which is, then it suddenly becomes, right, a kind of feasible organization model. And there's actually been a good number of companies who are working on infrastructure for DAOs. So Gnosis, Aragon, who you say haven't done much of late, and then a Colony, which was a really promising project. Trying to develop innovations like, and in a sense, they've got a lot of technical challenges to identify, right, or to solve. You've got to solve for identity, right? Then you've got to solve for reputation. I mean, those two alone are like nightmares, right? Someone comes along, they do a lot of work at the beginning, then they go away. Do they come back with the same reputation as before? Do they get to claim all the rewards? Because like 5 years ago, they did a bunch of work, right? But in time, it made a lot more difference. Or, Colony was trying to come up with really interesting innovations around like decaying reputations, right? Like almost like an atomic decay. But they, again, we're still waiting for those things to really come around. And they're competing against, I don't know, 170 years of a corporation,
Right.
so 1850s, I think, 1840s in the UK when we had the Corporation Act. There's a lot of innovation to compete with and outcompete, really, is what they've got to do. I've seen DAOs, I've been part of DAOs, I've been voted in DAOs. I want them to work. I've seen them fail plenty of times because they're trying to do, in my world, very complicated, specialized things, right? So, for example, if you're trying to productize data, well, great. Can you just randomly turn up and do that? No. You have to be a real specialist and a data scientist. Those people are few and far between and they cost a lot of money. Do they want job security? Somewhat, yeah. Do they just want to come along and in a mess of a DAO? No, not really, because they can get a better job or put their time into somewhere else. But what it does do is filter up all the people with real passions and conviction, right? Especially at the beginning of a project, which is usually like a lot of the special sauce you need.
Well, so like where do you start? So I mean, like I love the passion and getting people that are passionate about it, but how they define that passion, how they become aligned. Like in some ways that's so daunting in my mind, where you're trying to create rules and a process and just start the process. Like how do you really start a DAO?
How do you start a DAO?
I
I
would
watch
argue-
them being started, but go on.
Right. I mean, like, how do you define like what it? I think a Gnosis safe and a Discord chat or a Telegram chat is a DAO. I don't think you need, 1,000 people.
Yeah.
You have a way to do voting and you have a way to pool capital. And I think that's like your minimum viable DAO.
Yeah.
So you could either get a couple of people together, everyone pools funds into a Gnosis safe. If you have a specific thing you want to do, like you want to buy NFTs, you could use something like Prism, PRYSM. If you want to join a DAO, there's deepdao.io. It lists every one of them. You could like click through, see what's interesting for you. And it is a good fit for people who are proactive. And it's very open to saying like, here, like, you build something for a DAO, you share on their forums, like, here you go, I made this. And that's like, kind of like joining it.
Just start it. I mean, it's honestly, just start the dialogue and see where it goes.
Well, there's also infrastructure where you could set up a DAO in like seconds. DAO does this.
Sure.
It's very easy once you. We have a mutual friend, and a bunch of her and her friends in crypto got the same tattoo, and then they called themselves an ink DAO, but they hadn't. And then people took it seriously and started getting the tattoo on Twitter, and then they became a DAO. And I don't really know what they're doing beyond getting tattoos, but like that's kind of what it is. I'm serious.
Have you got the tattoo?
No,
okay.
I'm not.
Everybody after this, we're all getting the tattoo.
Peter on our team has the tattoo, so he's part of it. Yeah.
But Bored Ape Yacht Club is another example, I think, of something that didn't start as a DAO, really, as I've understood it. Like, it went out as a bunch of NFTs, and then it became effectively a club, right? And started to institute activities around that club, and then it effectively becomes a DAO, right? It's maybe worth two other broader points. Okay, go on.
Questions? We have like 3-4 minutes left here, so just if you got them, now go.
Okay.
Just to set it up.
One would be, look, this fits very well into potentially the kind of Gen Z lifestyle of moving in a freelance way, et cetera, right? So I'm going to participate in passions and projects, earn money by doing things that I really love.
Yep.
Great, fine. The second thing is it's worth, putting it in a historical context. Like it took hundreds of years for people to figure out, oh, you could detach capital and investment from the people who work in that and execute it, right? That was the corporation, effectively. Now we're at the stage where can you detach work from the organizational corporation body, right? Maybe that's another way of describing a DAO. Because if you can do that, great, that releases a whole load more sort of innovation and all the stuff that we've talked about. People know that it should, in theory, work.
Right.
There's been some, I think, things that have been somewhat successful beyond wisdom of crowds. But we're yet to really feel it. I think the tools aren't there.
That's great. The skeptic's coming out. That's great. Questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll go. As far as governance, obviously a challenge. What have you seen or what are you liking, or what would you had a magic wand to improve DAO governance going forward?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately about who you want to give a voice to on which topics and how much voice do you want to give. And there's been a lot of issues around voter apathy, a lot of backdoor governance where a lot of the conversation happens on a forum quite a bit after a decision has been made. There's this concept of governance extractable value where sometimes the DAO contributors almost become like a workers' union and they try to pass proposals to raise their own salaries. I think a lot of this, she made a point earlier, I don't think you need leaderless DAOs. I think it's not a mutually